Imagine not being able to read during a pandemic and miss out on life-saving information. Today, this is the case for at least 773 million adults and young people around the world who lack basic literacy skills. Globally, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted education, affecting 91% of students and 63 million teachers. While efforts have been made to continue education through distance learning, youth and adult literacy programs have mostly been suspended. This is a stark reminder of the fragile state of literacy learning. This needs to change. To leverage the transformative power of literacy, we need to prioritize quality teaching and learning. We need to invest in educators so they can adapt teaching to various conditions. We need to build robust learning systems so that literacy programs throughout life are resilient. Together, we can use the time of crisis to reimagine literacy teaching and learning. On International Literacy Day, let's step up the collective efforts and commit to making literacy teaching and learning a priority so that no one is left behind.
Good morning, good afternoon, bonjour, buenos dias. Warm welcome to the global meeting on literacy teaching and learning, held virtually to make the occasion of the International Literacy Day 2020. My name is Boran Chakroun. I'm the Director for Policy and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO headquarters in Paris. Dear colleagues, today we will have two virtual meetings. First, this global meeting, and the second is a webinar with the laureates of the UNESCO International Literacy Prizes 2020. Please note that the working languages of these meetings are English, French, and Spanish. You could be able to select the language at the bottom of your screen by clicking on the interpretation icon. Please also note that this meeting is recorded. Dear colleagues, the current COVID-19 crisis has illuminated the fragility of many youth and adult literacy educators, programs, and systems, as it impacted all education systems all over the world. It is in this context that this global meeting will examine the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on youth and adult literacy and educators. It will reflect on how literacy, teaching, and learning can be reimagined in the COVID-19 crisis and beyond. Now, I have the pleasure to invite Ms. Stefania Giannini, Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO, to take the floor for her opening remarks. Madame Giannini, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Excellente, mesdames et messieurs.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Director General, Madame Audrey Azoulay, it's a great pleasure for me to start this meeting on literacy and literacy learning, both during and after the COVID-19 crisis. This is a meeting that has been convened under the aegis of International Literacy Day.
International Literacy Day is being celebrated across the world in an unprecedented situation. The pandemic is not behind us. We know in all regions of the world, governments are somehow juggling between measures to stop the transmission of the virus, to reboot economies and jump-start the recovery phase. After 6 months of deep disruption, education stands on fragile ground everywhere. Nearly 24 million children and youth from preschooling to university level are at risk now of dropout this year in 2020 due to the pandemic's economic alone. Without remedial measures, this crisis will magnify the educational failures that already existed before the crisis. The fact that 773 million youth and adults are not literate, the fact that half of the world's children and adolescents were not acquiring the minimum basic fundamental skills in reading and numeracy after several years in school. These are the millions hardest hit by the crisis. Those who are less likely to have access to distance learning and life-safe information. According to our recent Global Education Monitoring report, published recently this year, 40% of the world's poor countries failed to support learners at risk during the COVID-19 crisis. There is patchy evidence on how literacy has fared during this pandemic. Let me mention some numbers that can recall us about the sense of urgency we have and the sheer collective responsibility. More than 90% of 49 older literacy programs that respond to a UNESCO survey reported that these had been partially or totally suspended. Lack of connectivity, educate training, readiness to shift to a new delivery model all come into play. Adult literacy and education have been absent in many initial education responses of countries and of international community as well. Furthermore, the risk of education budgets declining adds to the fragile outlook of literacy. UNESCO strongly warns that the funding gap to achieve SDG 4 right now, because of the crisis in poor countries, risks increasing to US 200 billion annually due to the COVID-19. And even before the crisis, still we know very well, nearly 60% of government spent less than 4 on adult literacy and education. Well, this is the picture. The COVID-19 crisis has provoked a massive education and a learning disruption. This is the real world we have to face. But it has also been a time of innovation and actions. We shall be hearing more about this dimension, this positive side of the coin today. Number of governments such as Afghanistan, Egypt, Chad, Senegal, just to mention a few of them, have taken bold action to support adult literacy position. Alternative solutions for teaching and learning have been put in place by a number of programs involving public services, civil society, the private sector, as a recent UNESCO survey has revealed. This is about, let me mention once again, the importance of a new kind of partnership, an initiative UNESCO put in practice during the COVID-19, the Global Education Coalition, which focused very much on this new shared responsibility and putting all different kind of partners around the table to address new challenges in education and give solutions. Several face-to-face programs shifted to online learning, overnight mostly. From FASDA in South Africa and Nirantan in India or Limerick and Clare in Ireland, working at the crossroads of literacy, gender, and learning support to both children and parents. Parents, by the way, are the main actors of the learning process in this unprecedented situation. Tostan in Senegal has kept in touch with communities to provide health information and support through booklets. Decoda Literacy Solution in Canada developed resources for hybrid modes of distance learning. And let me also say that hybrid learning as a model has become one of the most popular and maybe more innovative way to go in the future as well. DVV International work with the Malawi government to retain literacy facilitators as health information volunteers. And in all these cases, we also could see, let me say that education moved as a sector, hand in hand with other crucial public sectors. Health first, of course, as we are discussing about an health crisis. In short, literacy programs have been successfully maintained by increasing access to distance learning, better connectivity, literacy with vital areas such as health, already mentioned, and linking adult and children's learning programs. This has happened thanks to the dedication and commitment of literacy educators. They are all too often kept in the shadow when they are on the front lines. Today, they are on the front lines. Today, we are celebrating them to showcase how they bring hope, how they can change lives, and how they open opportunity for some of the most marginalized women and men in the world. Today, we are then definitely appealing for more recognition and support to literacy educators. It's about protecting their status and ensure they could be appropriately trained and remunerated as well. We need stronger collaboration. We need innovation to inject fresh commitment into literacy for the next decade. UNESCO is building an alliance for this. Through the Global Education Coalition I mentioned before, the Global Alliance for Literacy within the Lifelong Learning Framework, and the UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities. We will continue to monitor the impact of COVID-19 on adult literacy and education, and our strategy for youth and adult literacy focuses on 29 countries facing the steepest adult literacy challenges. Literacy empowers people. It's the first critical step to acquire knowledge and freedom. It expands their capabilities to choose a kind of life they can value. As the renowned Brazilian educator and philosopher Paulo Freire wrote almost 50 years ago, I suppose, in his milestone book, Pedagogy of Oppressed, literacy is not only about reading and writing. It's also about reading the word of empowerment, emancipation, and transformation. And more than ever, these words are really very much timely. It's a time of a crisis that has pushed society to the limits. Let's make literacy a force for inclusion and resilience. Let's make literacy a force to reimagine how we live, how we work, how we can learn differently, maybe, for a more sustainable and just development path. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining from all around the world. Thank you for your time, for your commitment. And please stay tuned for the Literary Prizes and happy celebration of International Literacy Day. Over to you, Berend.
Thanks to you, ADG Giannini, for these very important word that says a bit the background and I would say the agenda for our discussion this afternoon. Let me now invite Ms. Ulfa Abdulatif Muhammad Al-Sorori, teacher from Yemen. She is an educator working for the Educating and Integrating Refugees and Literacy Classes in Yemeni Society program, implemented by the General Literacy Office in Sana'a, one of our laureates for the International Literacy Prizes this year. Ms. Ulfa, the floor is yours.
Hello. First, let me tell you that I work as an instructor of the follow-up class, which is the highest and last level literacy classes. It's been a long time working as a volunteer in the field of literacy, and what we are concentrating of is reaching a better education. About COVID-19, during COVID-19 crisis, we faced many challenges. The impact of COVID-19 was huge in education, especially in literacy centers. On one hand, you get students. The psychological effect was huge because we had to stop doing our exams, our final exams, and that caused stress. On the other hand, you get workers, their economic life stopped, their salaries that used to be paid every 3 months were cut off, and everything got stopped. One good side is that we started using the social media. We made groups to follow our students, and we chose WhatsApp because it was the easiest and most available way by the students and their families. In addition, we participated, workers and teachers, also students participated in the awareness process among the educated and uneducated people. and that was by publishing posters and speeches as well through the internet. Also, the good participation or the active participation making masks and selling them to markets has covered some of the needs of workers and teachers. Also, we could cover the material needs during that time. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much. We are very pleased to hear your testimony and to see also from the ground these experiences. Dear colleagues, thanks to Madame Giannini and Ms. Abdulatif Mohammed Al Sururi for this introduction to our discussion today. We are now moving to the next session, and I'm pleased to hand over to my colleague who will be managing and leading the session, Mary Yasunaga. Please, Mary.
Thank you. Good morning. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to session 1, a global landscape on literacy, teaching, learning in the COVID crisis and beyond. My name is Maria Sanaga. I'm a program specialist working for the section of youth literacy and skills development. I'm here today to replace Mr. Albert Marchand, a chief of section who unfortunately cannot participate due to an unexpected incident. This session will look into the impact of the COVID crisis on youth and adult literacy from global, regional, and country perspectives. As ADG Mrs. Giannini mentioned, adult literacy provision has been negatively impacted during the crisis. The crisis has also shown that the very centrality of the teachers, educators to achieve the meaningful literacy teaching learning, at the same time also the fragility of the educators. So this session is intending to have a better understanding of the nature and magnitude of the crisis and the impact of the crisis on adult literacy and then also the education, and also so from different perspectives. So now let me introduce you to 3 speakers who would talk from different perspectives. So first speaker is the Mr. Boren Shakrun that you already met in the previous session. Mr. Shakrun, before joining UNESCO, worked for European Training Foundation and has extensive experiences in policy review and skill system diagnosis in different contexts. The second speaker is Ms. Rita Bisunav, who will provide a regional perspectives as the head of the African Union International Center for Girls and Women Education in Africa. Prior to that, she was a senior policy officer in education at African Union Commission. In 2020, this year, Rita was selected as one of the 100 most influential women in Africa. The third person, we had the pleasure to have Mr. Muhammad Yassin Samin on behalf of His Excellency Mr. Sada Muhammad Rahimi, Deputy Minister of Education for Literacy in Afghanistan. Mr. Samini will provide a country perspective as a senior technical and policy advisor at the Ministry of Education for Literacy. He has been a core member and of the education reform team in Ministry of Education Afghanistan that produced the Afghan Education Reform Plan 2021-2030, which is now being reviewed by the President for approval. So now let me invite the first speaker, Mr. Shakrun. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mary. Dear colleagues, in my presentation, I would like to cover some of the key findings that we have collected since the start of the COVID-19 crisis in terms of literacy program. But I must confess that my presentation and the findings are rather illuminative rather than conclusive, because of the lack of the information we are having and the lack of a thorough analysis that we hope will be able to conduct in the next few weeks. But still, based on a very brief survey that we have conducted, I believe we have some element that can, in a way, illustrate some of the initiatives that are being conducted, identifying what are the challenges that different programs are facing and different countries are facing, and potentially set a bit some of the element of the agenda that we hope, and the call from Madame Giannini earlier is very important. We hope that those challenges that we will be identifying, and probably through the discussion, through the Q&A sessions, we'll be able also to put together and craft in a way that we can convey to much larger community. Today we are around 500 participants in this webinar, in this meeting, which is already a very important community, but we hope to reach to much larger community beyond, probably, and that's our objective, beyond the literacy community. We need to make the voice of our community wider and larger, and I will come back to that. But maybe to start with, first of all, as Mrs. Giannini mentioned, the COVID crisis has negatively impacted education and learning system internationally across the world, including teaching and learning for children, young people, and adults. And I would like us to put the crisis in a lifelong learning perspective. And the goal today is not to focus only on schools, but to focus on different programs, and that's our role, I believe. We know that the crisis hardest hit the most marginalized and who probably had already difficulties in accessing to learning opportunities, including and specifically when we are speaking about the 773 million low literate or illiterate that we are considering for our discussion, and when we are speaking about the international statistics related to illiteracy. But we know that the learning losses will probably affect 1 million of learners that potentially run a risk to become illiterate, and will have significant implication for future state of literacy going forward. So basically, my key message today, and before I elaborate on it, is that societies will not recover better and will not recover back if there is no investment in education at all levels and in lifelong learning perspective. And that this should include ensuring the continuity of meaningful adult literacy teaching and learning for youth and adult, broadly speaking. Dear colleagues, for UNESCO, as in Education 2030 agenda, equity must remain an essential component of any educational and development agenda, any educational response to the COVID-19. We know well that marginalized people who have learning difficulties and disabilities represent a barrier to acquiring the listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills necessary to communicate in learning and participate in societies. We know that individuals with these challenges are more likely to be unemployed, poor, or receiving government assistance, and they are mostly marginalized in societies. So we need to cater for the most disadvantaged. We know also that the pandemic is exacerbating the situation. Findings from the just published Global Education Monitoring Report show that no current learning continuity strategy or mode ensures learning for all, and all means all. While there is a large number of data regarding school closure and reopening, the number of children and youth affected and their teachers, we know much less regarding literacy programs. In preparation of the International Literacy Day, we have conducted a rapid survey of literacy programs. Around 49 adult literacy programs responded to this survey. More than 90% declared that and reported that the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis had impact on their program, and that they have partially or totally suspended their action and their programs. Based on the survey and our engagement with the international education and literacy community, I wish to highlight here a set of issues I believe it is important to address to ensure continuity of learning for literacy. First, the lack of policy attention. Youth and adult literacy has been marginalized in the initial phase of the COVID-19 crisis. Often literacy programs have been absent in many initial education responses. Looking at the different countries and the different programs that we have identified. Furthermore, the risk of education budgets declining adds to the fragile outlook for literacy, as Madam Giannini mentioned. And we know that even before the crisis, nearly 60% of the governments spent less than 4% in adult literacy and education. But we know that public expenditure will be shrinking, and mechanically, potentially, education budget will be shrinking. And mechanically, again, adult literacy program will be shrinking. So it's important to raise the flag regarding the challenge in terms of policy attention and in terms of challenge in funding. A second issue I would like to highlight is regarding distance learning. Most of the programs that responded to our survey highlighted major challenges encountered in expanding distance learning. Lack of learners' access to internet is one important area that's mentioned. Around 84% of the respondents highlighted this issue. Limited availability of distance and digital learning content. Around 43% of the respondents referred to this challenge. Lack of facility in the centers and in the different institutions to produce learning materials that can be used in the distance learning mode. Around 41% mentioned this challenge. Lack of expertise of educators to convert from traditional teaching into remote learning. Around 39% of the respondents highlighted this challenge. Insufficient human resources to manage the distance learning. Around 33% of the respondents mentioned this challenge. These points shows the efforts, but also the struggles of these programs in shifting to distance learning. And it also shows the low readiness to move from traditional face-to-face learning to distance or remote learning. It is important that these programs have adopted a mix of delivery modes and technologies, from high to low to no-tech solutions, and I will come back to that later. The third issue I would like to highlight is that adult literacy educators are central for making literacy teaching and learning meaningful. They are, and they have been at the forefront coping with disrupted teaching and learning during the COVID crisis and now. But we know that adult literacy educators have faced a range of challenges, including salary reductions or termination of contracts, emotional psychological problems due to high anxiety and fragility, as well as inadequate digital skills, ICT in education and pedagogy's capacity that they have, which in a way echo and resonate with other problems that other teaching staff are facing. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the COVID has caused a massive educational learning disruption, but it has also been a time of innovation, creativity, leadership, and initiatives. We shall be hearing about this today in the different moment of our discussion and deliberation. But we have identified the number of government and stakeholder initiatives that have been actively responding to the crisis. And and it's important to highlight also these interesting initiatives. We know that alternative solutions for teaching and learning have been put in place.
Sabemos que hay soluciones alternativas a esta enseñanza.
Other provided online learning programs, let me mention some of them. For example, in Germany,
Sí, hay varios programas interesantes.
We are hearing the Spanish translation, I don't know why. For instance, the Deutsch Volksschulverband DVV has continued its support of adult learning centers, consisting of online tutoring for migrants and refugees to facilitate their integration and language development.
Están haciendo lo posible por integrar
In Cambodia, online and distance learning for literacy program have been introduced for a large number of students, including out-of-school youth and factory workers in 25 provinces. Dear colleagues, distance learning is not only high-tech solution, as I mentioned earlier. It is also low and no-tech solutions. For example, in Kenya, the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development has supported broadcasting literacy program of e-Kitab during the prime time of his education TV channel. In Senegal, Tostan has maintained contact with the communities and has supported them to read and understand booklets which contain information about the COVID-19 pandemic. In Latin America, for example, in countries like Guatemala and Costa Rica, blended learning was adopted by making learning materials available both in digital and printed format. And guidelines were developed to help the families of literacy learners. Other countries and initiatives have focused on educational resources. For example, Decoder Literacy Solution in Canada developed resources for hybrid modes of distance learning. Another important action is about supporting literacy educators. For example, in Bangladesh, Friendship Adult Literacy Program provided guidance to educators through mobile phones. In Egypt, the General Authority for Literacy and Adult Education has provided training for distance teaching and learning to education and teachers and literacy teachers. We also have examples of how the benefit of intergenerational approaches has worked for both children and parents. For example, in Ireland, the Limerick and Clare Education and Training Board has continued to provide family learning programs through live online classes for parents with low literacy skills. In addition to support on the phone support to those parents. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, to sum up, literacy programs are facing major challenges. We need to enhance our knowledge of the situation, barriers for progress, and advocate for literacy in different fora, including education, development, and financing fora. We also see innovation and initiative. It's important to document and record and share these programs, and the International Literacy Prizes are an important vehicle for that. We know that in some places literacy programs have been successful in maintaining and increasing distance learning for literacy programs and making the link with health and other development areas. This has happened thanks to the dedication and commitment of literacy educators. They are all often kept in the shadow, as Madame Giannini mentioned, but our role is to bring them under light and to bring them to the forefront of the debate and highlight and recognize the value of their contribution. For example, the UNESCO Teacher Task Force appealed for more recognition and support to teachers, including literacy educators, to protect their status and ensure that they are adequately trained and remunerated. So our voice today should be loud about literacy educators, and the need in recovering better and equitably so that no one is left behind. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Moran, for this comprehensive intervention. Now I have the pleasure to invite Ms. Rita Bismuth. The floor is yours, Rita.
Thank you very much, Mary. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a pleasure to be with you here today on this important topic on how adult and youth literacy has been impacted by the COVID-19 in the African continent. We know by April 6 of 2020, 53 of our African Union member states out of the 55 member states had shut down their institutions of learning. This has left 20 million learners out of school at pre-primary, 160 million learners at primary level, 56 million at secondary level, and 8 million at tertiary level with no access to continued learning and teaching facilities across our continent. The African Union Commission organized a meeting with the Ministers of Education, Science and Technology in May 2020, where all the ministers underlined the use of educational technologies such as radio, such as television, to provide remote learning opportunities for our girls, boys, men, and women during the lockdown imposed by COVID-19. Some countries have also put in place online tools and platforms for the continuity of learning during this period. However, evidence has shown that many of these online platforms and tools have reached relatively small number of learners due to poor connectivity issues, having no electricity, and not having computers or having only one computer per household. And this has been really very bad in rural areas. We know that in our continent, nearly 1 out of 3 adults cannot read and write properly. And as Madame Giannini pointed out, literacy goes beyond reading and writing. And without this adequate level of literacy, where we're talking about different levels of competencies, especially in this technological world, our people will not be able to make informed decisions and shape policies in their communities. And during this COVID crisis, the number of adult learners will increase for those not being able to have any continuity of learning. And many of our countries have not made provisions for learners outside the formal education, and this is a big challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, school closures harm girls in many ways, very often with long-term consequences. Already across our continent, the girls and young women already faced a host of barriers to education, which results in substantial gender parities. They are exposed to many abuses such as child marriage, female genital mutilation, which ends their education abruptly. Schools are safe spaces for girls. When they are in school, they are less likely to be forced into marriage and to abuse sexually. During this pandemic, the schools have not been here to protect our girls. And this crisis has put our girls at higher risks of sexual violence, exploitation, trafficking, child marriage, forced labor, and social exclusion. It is estimated that around 10 million more secondary age girls could be out of school after this crisis has passed in our continent. It is very important for our governments to institute appropriate gender-sensitive responses to the current and future education challenges for education. We are well aware that the education consequences of COVID-19 will go beyond the period of school closures, which will disproportionately affect girls and women, especially the marginalized ones. And of course, as we just said earlier, girls are more at risk of dropping out than boys following those school closures. When schools are closed, especially in conflict-affected countries, the prevalence of child labor, sexual exploitation, and recruitment in armed groups increases. And especially this risk is higher if our schools do not reopen. So it is very critical that we ensure that we make our learners, we connect our learners to learning opportunities at this time when most of our schools are still closed. We should not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that learning is deeply human, with emotions driving our learning processes. During COVID, learners are isolated and learning has become very depersonalized. Many students in Africa have shared with us feelings of stress, anxiety, isolation, and depression because of this lack of contact with their school community. Their sense to go through their daily lives has been disrupted. If our children, if our boys, our girls, especially our girls, do not go back to school, this will be a major setback. And especially all the work which has been undertaken by our member states, by the governments, by development partners, by civil society, will have been useless. This is why the African Union CFA, the International Center for Girls and Women's Education, we are launching a campaign to ensure that our girls go back to school as schools are slowly reopening. We saw what happened during the Ebola crisis in the African continent. Many of our girls were not able to go back to school because either they got married early, they were pregnant, or for other areas. As I have already said, in conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic has increased disparities in education in the African continent with the rest of the world. And this might widen this intra-Africa variability. We recognize, it has been recognized more and more that digital literacy for both students and learners, for students and teachers, is an indispensable element for children's rights to education. It is important that our governments provide affordable, reliable, and accessible internet service to all our learners. However, we do know that in some countries, this is not going to be easy, setting up digital learning infrastructures and platforms in our countries. One possibility is to invest in low-cost, solar-powered tablets loaded with a textbook of digital books and learning resources to off-grid classrooms with no internet and electricity. As part of the COVID-19 response packages, governments should also provide financial support to offset school-related expenses for children whose families have suffered economic hardship and will not be able to return to school. In countries where girls' enrollment or completion of secondary school is lower than boys, governments should consider launching or continuing financial incentives to ensure that girls return to school as safely as possible. With this, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rita. Yeah, thank you for the presentation, shedding light on the current adult literacy challenges, but also the future ones, and particularly focusing on the gender dimension. Now, I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Mohammed Yassin Samin to talk about the experience and the responses of the Afghanistan government during the COVID crisis. Floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, good evening to everyone. It's evening in Afghanistan. I want to make sure if you hear me, please. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, let me give you a very quick snapshot of what has been done recently in literacy and adult education in Afghanistan. It's very quick. Unlike the past governments, fortunately, during the recent government that we've had, the National Unity Government in Afghanistan, the political support for literacy and non-formal education has substantially increased. It's a very good news. The president ordered a plan that's called the National Mobilization for Literacy, which is being now implemented. In addition, the president ordered the establishment of the provincial literacy district and village literacy committees, which has been established in almost all corners of Afghanistan. These are coordinating organizations or structures that provide for coordination and also joint monitoring of the literacy and non-formal education initiatives in Afghanistan. This, I wanted to say that we are on the right track in terms of policy support and also in terms of the national, local, and village level structures that are necessary for conducting literacy initiatives in Afghanistan. And also, let me tell you that at the national level, we have the National Literacy Committee, which is being supervised by His Excellency, the Vice President, Second Vice President, which the meetings are held quarterly, and it's somehow where the literacy, technical policy, and programmatic issues are discussed, and the instructions are given to the relevant partner organizations, including the government institutions. Under National Mobilization for Literacy and Continued Education, we also have recently signed more than 50 MOUs with government institutions which has conditioned literacy, or we can say it encourages low-level civil service workers to attend literacy courses, including those in private sectors, like people who receive licenses from the government. This is just a quick introduction. Let me say that COVID-19, like other disasters, have really had negative impacts on literacy, overall education, service delivery, and also very particularly on literacy and non-formal education. You know that COVID-19 pandemic posed one of the biggest threats to achieving sustainable development goal 4 of quality education for all globally. So Afghanistan is not an exception. The pandemic impact situation that has been resulting from conflict that we have had very long in Afghanistan. Considering that the schools, literacy centers, and adult education centers had the potential to contribute to the accelerated spread of COVID-19, the Ministry of Education and the Afghan government decided to close all educational institutions on March 14, 2020. So to avoid the dangers that was posed by the COVID-19. But however, the Afghan government did not stop and did not sit to do nothing. The minister and also the deputy ministers and also technical people at the Ministry of Education worked together to develop a comprehensive education response plan, which suggests some alternative strategies under COVID-19. The very common were distance learning through TV and radio, small group learning in open space, which was confined to 5 students per shift in open space, self and family literacy at home, and also self-capacity building of literacy facilitators throughout the country. This was quite successful in the case of, especially the open space classrooms were quite successful in case of literacy and adult continued education, as just a few months later than the time we implemented the strategy, more than 40,000 learners throughout Afghanistan were covered in this program. And also it's worth mentioning that initially we had a television that is called the Education TV. It was mainly operating at Kabul and its surroundings, but when the government decided to launch the alternative plan, so we expanded the broadcasting capacity of the Ministry of Education, television and radio. And also we partnered with the National Radio and Television Network, which is available at provincial, district, and village level to deliver remote and distance lessons to the learners throughout the country. It has been very successful, but still there were challenges. The first challenge was that that the ICT infrastructure was very weak in Afghanistan. We could not really deliver online low-tech lessons because with exceptions of urban and semi-urban areas, it was very difficult to access to internet, quality teachers and facilitators to deliver lessons. And in addition, do you hear me? Hello? Hello?
We lost you a bit, but you are back now, so please continue. And if you can finish, we will be moving to the discussion.
Yeah. Okay, so this was the case. I mean, there were some technical issues. Sorry for that. Actually, the infrastructure for literacy and adult education in Afghanistan, especially in terms of ICT equipments and facilities, were close to non-existence. But we really focused on distance learning through television and also provided a series of guidelines and procedures to help the provincial level officials and also literacy personnel at district level to build stronger relationship with the learners and conduct small group lessons. In the meantime, we also
Mr. Samin, Mr. Samin, Mr. Samin, can you hear me?
To continue their capacity building in service training and pre-service training skills. Okay. So, and let me tell you that the education response plan that was developed by the Ministry of Education, it also included the recovery section guided to the Ministry of Education.
Mr. Samin, very unfortunately that I think the connection is not really strong and good, so that I'm afraid that I have to ask you to end your presentation here. But thank you so much for telling your stories to us. And now that we have a very limited time, we have received many questions, so we would like to move to the Q&A session. And thank you really for everybody that who asked questions. Let me ask just one question to each speaker very quickly. So perhaps if you could respond.
Sorry, actually, let me say sorry for the disruption. So.
All right. So Mr. Samin, yes, that the connection is not good, so that I'm afraid that I have to maybe ask you to end your presentation here. But perhaps could I ask maybe forward the question to you, that I think some the participants are asking about, how to reach out to the people in rural areas. This is apparently the one of the challenges that I think many people face, all over the world. So if you could maybe elaborate that point, that'd be great. So floor is yours, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. But actually, we came up with clear strategies, like we developed guidelines both for the learners and also for family learning and literacy learning, which we can say intergenerational learning, and also I said that we delivered lessons through radio and television, which is quite good at the rural and suburban areas. And also we established strategies that we used to in the meantime, in terms of the monitoring, to follow the guideline and develop short, small WhatsApp groups to follow up with the learners during the COVID-19, to make sure that they really continued their lessons. And if they had any questions about the technical issues, in the meantime, we followed with the teachers through
Barry,
the
we need to move.
literacy managers at the district
Mr. Samin?
and also
Mr.
literacy
Samin,
managers at the provincial
excuse me,
level
I'm
to
really
continue
sorry
their
to...
capacity building by following the instructional materials that we had already provided. And we, yes, please. Yes, yes.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. I'm afraid really that the connection is not really good, so sorry, but thank you so much, I think, for your intervention, and then also sharing these sort of the approaches to reach out to the people in the remote area. Now, turning to Rita, that there are some questions regarding the, how to make learning more inclusive, and also, the girls and women, to reach out to girls and women, but also people with disabilities. If you could maybe elaborate a bit about, the literacy for targeting these people, what your advice in important issues. So floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if we want to advance, if we want to progress in this field, it cannot be done alone. It has to be done together. It has to be a collaborative effort between, not only between member states, but also member states, the young people, because especially in Africa, we know that over 60% of our population are under the age of 35. So working with the youth, and the youth working in their communities, with the civil society, and with the different stakeholders. And I think for us, one of our biggest ally in Africa is also working with religious and traditional leaders. And what we are doing right now at the African Union CFA is that we have got a group of alumni who are going in their communities and working in their communities to ensure that literacy is something that we should not be still talking about after so many years, that this has been on our plate. So I think it is something that cannot be done alone. It is a collaborative effort between different stakeholders, but ensuring a coordination among the different groups to ensure that those figures try to decrease, and that we have more than one one adult out of 3 who cannot read and write properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then lastly, that we have a question also, a lot of questions regarding funding, and then how to support, technically the distance learning. So could we now turn to Boren for you to answer these questions? Thank you, Boren.
Thank you. I think that the point on investment in distance learning is critical for advancing the agenda. We have highlighted earlier that there is a gap in the financing, but it's the question about not only about the investment, but also where to invest first. It's about priority as well. In any case, we are entering into an economic recession, so the resources are shrinking. I think the point and the advocacy should be about how we can reach the ones that are most marginalized and the ones that were affected at the highest level from the crisis and the pandemic. And obviously, in terms of the investment, how we can leverage different resources in an innovative way of resources. For example, how we can leverage the resources from the private sector, in particular from the edtech industry. How we can leverage resources from the telecom companies, for example, by lowering the cost of access to internet. And we have, through the Global Education Coalition that Stefania mentioned, we have managed to agree with the different telecom companies to lower the cost, or even put for free access to education data. So there should be a mix of solutions, both in terms of the sources of financing and where they can come from, government resources, but also potentially private sector, but also in terms of where should we invest in the priority of investment, and again, equity first, meaning how we can invest in the most marginalized and the ones that have been most hit by the crisis. I think this is an important aspect that we need to take into consideration. Maybe lastly is the efficiency of these investment, how we ensure that the dollars that is invested is yielding better results, for example, reaching out to a larger number of participants. So rather than investing potentially in high tech, investing in low tech that can touch and can reach out to a large group. So these are strategies that we'll have to consider as well. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Beren, and thank you very much to all speakers, but also for all participants that who actively engaged with the discussion. We try to respond to your questions as much as possible, but also thank you really to please continue to ask questions in the next session as well. This session really highlighted again that negative impact of crisis, but of course the crisis is a moment of the opportunity. I mean, so to seize the opportunities. So the opportunities to integrate the youth and adult literacy into lifelong learning policies, but also the national response and recovery plans. Also the opportunities to reimagine teaching learning for youth and adult literacy during the COVID crisis, but also beyond. So it is with my gratitude that I now close this session. So thank you so much. And please enjoy the next session.
David, it's you.
Good afternoon to all. Bienvenue à cette seconde session après.
We can't hear you, David. It's a bit far, David.
Après ce panorama international.
Now we can hear you. After this overview around the world of what's happening in literacy, in particular against the background of COVID-19, the next step is to look at the quality and learning processes. In particular, we will be looking at the role of trainers and educators. To do so, we have a specialist panel that will provide us with insight thanks to their experience and understanding of literacy processes. And very briefly, I'd like to introduce the 5 speakers on our panel that we have with us today. Mr. Mafaka Touré, who is a consultant in literacy and education in Senegal. Judy Kalman, professor, Department of Educational Research at the Center of Research and Advanced Studies in Mexico. Michael Thomas, who is a professor of cognitive neuroscience in University of London. Ms. Anita Digay, who's an expert in literacy and education in India. And David Archer, who is head of participation and public services at ActionAid. So we have these specialists with us, and they will help us to answer some of your questions. In particular, when it comes to the determining factors in the quality, in particular, the relevance of what we do in literacy. In addition to that, we'll be looking at the main issues impacting the quality of teaching for literacy. And then, of course, we will also be addressing the issue of the continuity of programs and the strategies already implemented by countries against the background of COVID-19. So that, roughly speaking, is the menu for this session. And to lead the discussions, it's my pleasure to be the one who will give the panelists the floor. And I'm David Achuarena, Director of UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. So to kick off, I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Mafaka Touré from Senegal, who will take a more specific look at the question of educators and vocational learning continuums. So you have 6 minutes, sir, and if there's a minute left over, or rather, I will warn you when you have a minute left so that perhaps we have time for questions and certainly so that you don't overstep your time. You have the floor, sir. Mr. Mafaka you have to turn on your microphone, otherwise no one can hear you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, David. I hope you can hear me now. Yes, loud and clear. Let me start by thanking UNESCO for involving me in this panel and inviting me to this discussion. As you know, Senegal has worked very hard in literacy. We are now roughly up to 50% literacy after being much lower than that in 2000. And to a large extent, that is thanks to our educators. And there are people that we call facilitators or monitors or supervisors and master artisans. And in particular, we're going to take a closer look at facilitators, which is similar to primary school teachers on the formal side. They've worked very hard and made major contributions to education, but also encountered three particular kinds of problems. The first is with respect to the actors involved. So there are various types of actors, various statuses that they have. Qualification is low, and remuneration is very low. And of course, this leads to problems with motivation. Second type of problem is with training, because often they only get very basic training or none at all. The curriculum is not always well suited, which means that it's very difficult for them to teach certain skills. Another issue is support. Because a lot of these trainers are undertrained themselves. Then we have a problem with resources and teaching material, which is inadequate so often. As for what governments should be doing, my response is that the first thing that a government must do is to consider that formal and informal sectors should be addressed in the same way. That's to say, you need an overall global education vision, but in particular, with respect to human resources, what's required is a good training program for all teachers and educators, whether we're talking about literacy, formal literacy training or informal with our facilitators. Senegal has well understood this because from the beginning, as of back in 2010, we reformed our system. We used to have primary teacher training colleges, but now we have training for education personnel in general. And what we've done is to set up a department for the non-formal sector. Taking this even further, we are now training versatile educators that can work in both sectors, formal and informal, with quite a substantial curriculum, of course. Another thing, to deal with this situation, Senegal has gone into a major research program, which has enabled us to solve some of the problems we had with resources, say teaching material in particular. But the big problem, or rather the solution to the problem, has been what we've called CAPED, because UNESCO has been supported across a number of areas in teacher training and policy setting. And all of this has produced the upshot of a strong recommendation that experience should be given its proper role with these educators. And Senegal was a fertile ground for this because back in 2014, we had a big training and education congress that produced the recommendation that experience should be considered in the training of some educators. Then there was a presidential instruction about that, and the state secretary for the promotion of education also supported that. Yes, I'm going to have to interrupt you there and ask you to reach your conclusion. Well, this has been the process. We're reaching the conclusion. Our literacy program is going ahead. All the instruments are in place. The instruments have been developed. We have our guidelines. Without COVID-19, we would have been implementing all this already. Thank you so much, Mr. Touré, for that presentation. It's very comprehensive and it's enabled you to identify some of the stumbling blocks in this process. You talked about different backgrounds, profiles, and statuses of these educators, and of course, different levels of remuneration, often inadequate, and the lack of teaching materials. With respect to Senegal's response, I noted what you said about the need to consider formal and informal education as equals. That is very important. Also, what you said about producing versatile educators that can teach both children and adults, that's important. And what you said about recognizing the value of experience. That's now been institutionalized, and we feel this will strengthen connections between formal and informal sectors. Thank you so much for that contribution.
Perspective, and specifically we're going to reflect on the potential of digital technology. We already heard in the previous session that technology has been playing an increasing role in the context of COVID-19, in particular in the school system, but what has been the case for adult education and specifically for literacy teaching. Mrs. Kalman, you have the floor, and again, you have also 6 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning from Mexico. And thank you to the 2020 International Literacy Day Secretariat for inviting me to speak with you today. I was asked to specifically address 2 questions. The first one is concerned with how can ICT make a difference in enhancing the relevance and effectiveness of literacy teaching and learning. I would pose this question a little bit differently, however. Rather than putting technology in the center, I would inquire about human beings and how we organize social activities, including learning activities. A different way to look at this is to ask, how can we as educators use ICT to make a difference in the way we teach literacy and the way learners construct knowledge? This formulation puts human subjects back into this question. It shifts our attention from what the technology does to how we use it and how it gets us closer to a social practice and performative approach to education, teaching, and learning. So having said that, here are some ways we can use digital technologies to enhance our teaching and perhaps make literacy learning more effective. We can design situations that support creative processes and cultural production rather than the transmission of content or a focus on predetermined skills. This means rethinking how we use our time and what we use it for. We can share responsibility for teaching and learning with the different participants. We can promote intermediate products as a basis for examining learning processes. And we can put new ideas and know-how into play and encourage learners to think about things and use things before they completely understand how they work. We need to encourage the exchange of ideas, mobilization of resources, and encourage helping and getting help. When we think about technology, we think often first of the internet, but even without connectivity, digital technologies offer many options that extend or upgrade some of what print technologies have to offer. One clear example of this, there's no time for more, is the use of dynamic representations that allows us to see how values and curves move about, or how movement is part of meaning making. If connectivity is available and stable, and this is a big if in many parts of the world, using connected digital technologies opens up the possibility for tapping into infinite resources, doing searches, locating and analyzing information, and participating in the exchange of ideas with people we know and people we don't know through synchronic and asynchronic messaging, forums, and collaborative tools. This brings me to the second question. In ICT-supported learning, what are the roles of educators? For educators to use the vast number of resources, tools, and procedures available through digital technologies to enhance learning and teaching of literacy, we need at least three things. A deep understanding of literacy and what it means. Practice and knowledge about cultural and scientific production. This includes know-how regarding specific cultural objects. For example, knowing how to create web pages or infographics, participate in forums, find groups of interest online. We need to know what they are and what they are good for, and you cannot teach what you yourself don't know about. A firm understanding of how humans construct knowledge and the aspects that we as educators can work with in pedagogical designs. The question regarding literacy is what requires some examination of the more common sense notions and social narratives about reading and writing and how it is learned. Being that today is International Literacy Day, I would be remiss if I did not say something about what I think literacy is and what is the most useful way to think about it. Literacy is a complex and complicated feat. It involves the articulation of multiple elements such as material goods, social knowledge, technologies, know-hows, beliefs, and values. It also implies multiple actions: the appropriation of discourses and written conventions, establishing audiences, connecting written language with other forms of representation, producing and interpreting a text, establishing intertextual relationships. It clearly goes way beyond learning letters and sounds or issues of correctness, normativity, and prescription. This is true with or without digital technologies. A broader view would see literacy as a social practice and account for its historical, material, and relational and situated dimensions. Today, a key feature of being literate is being able to adapt to the rapidly changing nature of written and multimodal communications, negotiate complex materialities, social relationships, environments, and knowing how to think critically about what is online or in print. Teaching others is about provoking learning that has to do with specific phenomena and know-how. When we learn, what we learn, and how we learn it are integral parts of knowing. Knowledge cannot be transferred or transmitted, rather it is constructed through participation in emerging complex contexts. As educators, creating context for learning is one of our most important jobs. One of the best ways to support educators, teachers, and practitioners is through solid professional preparation and opportunities for teacher learning. We can help teachers and educators incorporate technologies by giving them time to explore their ideas about teaching and learning, discovering its ties to institutional arrangements, and figuring out how they can reinvent their practice. Teachers need time to learn about how to use technology and how to talk about it. They need a language to be able to express themselves. Teacher learning involves the opportunity to try things out, assess, and redirect efforts. Learning is excelled through collaboration and horizontal interaction. The challenges we face in COVID emergency are extensions of the challenges that we have been facing for some time. The strengths and weaknesses of education are only magnified, but are not new except perhaps for the imposed distance that we are now losing. We are now living. I'm finishing. As in all crises, this is our opportunity to take a hard look at what we do, and we believe as the first step to reinventing teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kalman, for this overview of what we can expect from technology, but also more importantly, what are the implications for teachers. Thanks for reminding us the importance of digital skills and digital competencies that educators need to acquire to be able to use ICT for literacy, but also to be able to transform their pedagogy. I'd like now to invite our next speaker, Mr. Michael Thomas, who is going to actually complement in a way some of the points that were just made about learning and learning for adults, bringing some perspectives from the point of view of the neuroscience of learning and what we know about how the brain works and how this can actually guide, and improve education and learning for adults, including literacy. So, Mr. Thomas, you have the floor. 6 minutes as well.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to contribute to this important session. So my name is Michael Thomas, and I'm a professor of cognitive neuroscience at Birkbeck University of London. And I'm director of the Centre for Educational Neuroscience in London. So my research centre has the goal of translating findings from neuroscience to education and to education policy, and supporting a dialogue between the multiple disciplines that now comprise the learning sciences. Today, I'm going to talk briefly about the neuroscience perspective on youth and adult literacy acquisition. This year, my research centre published a report commissioned by the World Bank, which investigated adult literacy programs in the developing world. As we've heard, these programs are an important escape route from poverty, yet sometimes these programs can prove ineffective. The question is there a neuroscience reason why they might be ineffective? Is the adult brain somehow less plastic than the child's brain? So here's what the neuroscience tells us. All things being equal, it's better to start learning earlier than later, but there is nevertheless lifelong plasticity in the adult brain. Now, there are some reductions in plasticity in the adult brain, but these mainly relate to low-level perceptual skills. Learning new perceptual discriminations in sound or in vision can be harder when you're older, and you may need some more help. For reading acquisition, this means extra help working on what we call phonology. That's the sounds of words. For example, being able to break the word dog down into its component sounds, d, o, g. And similarly, more help in learning the visual discriminations that are required to recognize the patterns that make up letters and symbols. You need help as an adult to break both of these types of stimuli down into their component parts, and then to be able to link the two to carry out decoding, a key part of literacy. Adults are helped in their learning by having extra feedback, exaggerated versions of the sounds and symbols they have to learn, hints and rules to follow, and an understanding of their own language, what we call metacognition. Combining reading with learning to write is also helpful. The details of the specific practices depend a little bit on the particular languages and scripts involved, and I won't talk about that more here. Today I'm focusing on literacy, but from a neuroscience perspective, the same lessons would apply for adult numeracy acquisition. In that case, the focus will be on building recognition skills for the basic perceptual aspects in numeracy, numbers and symbols, recognizing iconic patterns like the dots on a dice, what is meant by quantity, so-called number sense, formalisms like shapes, geometry, and graphs, and a focus as well on practice with number facts and procedures like times tables and number bonds, the kind of skills that need to become automatic in numeracy acquisition. Somewhat surprisingly, however, our research showed that actually adults are better learners in the classroom than children. That is, by the end of a lesson, they will have learned more. And that's because adults can sit still and pay attention for longer than children. Adults can follow detailed instructions and strategies. Why is it then that adults somehow seem to be less effective learners than children? Well, there are two main reasons for that. The first is that adults don't appear to consolidate skills, that is, build them up, so that they tend to forget more in between the lessons than children. And adults may need more practice to reach automaticity, that is, easy and effortless automatic reading. There is as well a third and important factor, and that is that adult lives are more complicated. Adults have jobs or are raising families, particularly women, and have many competing demands on their time. One estimate from children's education is that it takes around 2,000 hours of learning to learn to read. So if you were to attend an adult literacy program for, say, 2 hours, 3 times a week for 9 months, at the end of that, you would only have completed around 10% of what you need to do to learn to read. That means the other 90% of your learning needs to take place at home in the form of practice, and it needs to be squeezed into busy lives. So the question is, how can this be supported? The important thing for adult learners is motivation. Adults literacy needs to be made personally relevant to the individual. It needs to be a means to an end in their lives rather than a goal in itself. What new things can people do once they can learn to read? Perhaps they can text their friends on their phones or read football scores. And practice needs to be supported by social networks of learners. Peer support for learning is essential.
So Thomas, if you can move to your concluding part.
Okay, we can't just focus on individual brains. There can be wider barriers to youth and adult literacy, such as educational, structural, and cultural barriers. We need to ask whether teachers are trained to teach adults or borrow, or are they just borrowed from primary schools? Are adults learning to read in their native language? Is there bottom-up community support for the literacy program, or has it simply been mandated by top-down government? I haven't had time really to speak about the COVID crisis, but really it's likely to hit hardest on those who most need literacy acquisition. And I would suggest that there are opportunities, as we've heard, to perhaps, as they say, build back better by using technical opportunities to support personal relevance and opportunities for practice in the learners' lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And maybe one, point that I think we all noted with the fact that adults are actually better learners in the classroom than children. I think this was maybe a surprise to many of us, and it was also interesting to see that in spite of this ability, what are the obstacles that actually affect the learning process and need to be addressed for effective learning strategies. So thank you for this perspective. Now we're going to turn to our next speaker, Mrs. Anita Dige from India, who is going to address an issue which is of high interest. I think it's a priority really for UNESCO. Is the question of inclusion. How to ensure inclusion and to ensure that the policy responses and the programs in the field of literacy are truly inclusive. Mrs. Dige, you have the floor. 6 minutes as well.
Thank you, sir. Well, first I would like to, describe what are the challenges to adult literacy and education in the post-literacy world. Due to the COVID pandemic, school education in most third world countries, as we have heard before, has been seriously affected. It is possible that post-literacy post-COVID, due to economic crisis, education budgets for adult literacy and education programs would be severely curtailed, and we have heard that also earlier. As a result, government programs would suffer from a lack of resources. In such a likely scenario, civil society groups would have an important role to play. They would have to take the responsibility for providing educational programs for diverse group of learners and focus on empowering communities. Unlike school education, online learning would be difficult for adults, particularly for women, because they prefer face-to-face collaborative learning. Hence, the literacy teachers could be mobilized to form groups of 5 to 6 learners, and they could meet at places where social distancing norms could be maintained. The literacy programs would not be limited to teaching 3 hours, but should have an expanded vision of adult learning. This larger vision would include the concept of lifelong learning that would include formal, non-formal, and informal learning and education. The teaching learning process itself should be dialogical and encourage processes of critical self-reflection, thinking, questioning along Freudian lines, and would be directly linked to the notion of empowerment. These processes would need to be used for empowering communities so that learning communities can be established. Now, given this broad understanding of the role of adult learning and education in the post-COVID world, an attempt is made below to spell out what are some of the key elements for making literacy teaching and learning more inclusive. First of all, I think we should identify who are the marginalized groups. We should focus on the marginalized groups such as rural and urban poor, after-school children and youth, physically challenged people, migrant workers, transgender community, ethnic minority groups, refugees, etc. A clear statement would help establish its priority concern. As far as women are concerned, there has to be a separate program for women because they learn best when they're part of a homogeneous group. The second point is the literacy teacher needs to establish a congenial atmosphere in the literacy class. Adults need to be treated with respect, their views and opinions elicited. An ambience of give and take, of sharing experiences, ensures that adults will continue to come to the literacy classes. A literacy teacher needs to articulate a vision for the literacy program along with the learners. And this can be done collectively with the learners to ascertain what are their expectations from the literacy program, what do they want to achieve. Number 4, one of the problems with the existing educational programs is that they tend to be a one-size-fits-all educational program. It has to be recognized that diverse groups of learners have diverse learning needs and interests. So you can use ethnographic research and various participatory techniques to help in prioritizing learner needs. Number 5, there is a need to work collaboratively with learners in developing a curriculum for the literacy program. Sensitivity to the culture of the learners and use of local language would ensure learner involvement and learner motivation. The literacy teacher needs to utilize teaching learning strategies that evoke curiosity, questioning, analysis, synthesis, perspective building among learners. To sustain learning environment, the learning environment, literacy teachers should involve learners in developing a variety of materials. And here I feel that technology can develop suitable materials using ICTs. Since adults learn best when they are given an opportunity for critical thinking, analysis, and reflection, it is now necessary for men and women to reflect on how patriarchy has defined the roles of men and women in the family and the society, and that they have to bring about a change in the existing attitudes and practices so that a change in the gender roles can be brought about. There is a need to help learners to learn holistically. You cannot compartmentalize learning. The interlinkages have to be established so that learners can begin to understand their own local reality within a wider context. And lastly, ensure that the literacy or the adult education program becomes a part of a larger struggle for social, economic, and political change. And this is something that if it begins to happen, then it does motivate learners a great deal. That was our experience in India when we were implementing the total literacy campaigns. Now, the next question I'd like to answer is, what do we already know about the gender dimension of literacy teaching and learning?
In one minute, Mrs. Dia, for this last point.
Okay, inadequate attention has been paid to understanding the barriers to women's learning. Women have several barriers. They come to literacy classes in large numbers, but due to various patriarchal considerations, they tend to come irregularly or eventually drop out. There are also intangible barriers, and we have to understand those. Then there is an inadequate understanding relating to women's lack of self-confidence, and they have a low self-esteem. So basically, you have to enable women to find their voices, and which is a positive reinforcement and an assurance that women need to know that they are intelligent and can express an opinion. And literacy teachers can play a very important role in empowering them at the personal level. Women learn best in learning environments which is conducive to collaborative learning. They learn best where affective forms of knowledge that come from their lived experiences are valued. Unlike men, they speak the local dialect, and so materials have to be developed in the local language, graduating to the standard regional language, because that is the language of power. Literacy may not be a felt need for women, and hence it should not be imposed on women. It should come, women will ask, when they feel the need, they will ask for literacy, and that is when the literacy programs, literacy skills have to be developed in women. In this, the next issue is that women acquire varying levels of literacy. Research has shown that they take more time than men in becoming functionally literate. They're less likely to use their literacy skills in everyday life, and hence are prone to relapse into illiteracy. And so you have to develop a variety of materials to ensure that they continue to use their literacy skills. And lastly, poor women invariably ask for an income generation program. Now, it is very difficult when you do both, when you do literacy and income generating activity for women, because you end up doing neither. So but the experience in some countries is showing that it is necessary to address the issue of poverty centrally. When poverty becomes the focus of intervention, then women's empowerment and an expanded vision of literacy and livelihoods as part of lifelong learning becomes essential.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Digge. Maybe three points that I'd like to highlight. First of all, the need for really targeted policies which are meant to address the challenges faced by specific vulnerable groups. The importance to design programs that allow to learn holistically. I think this is something that sometimes we don't remember. And finally, the points you made about women's literacy, and in particular, the need to link this with a broader vision of empowerment and social transformation. And I believe this actually links very well to our next speaker, Mr. David Archer from ActionAid, who is going to speak specifically about empowerment and freedom, based on the very rich lessons now from the very well-known method Reflect. David Archer, you have the floor.
Many thanks, David. And yes, I mean, I want to echo many of the things that have been said by panelists before me. And focus on what are some of the critical lessons coming out of the Reflect practice since 1993, when Reflect started in El Salvador, Uganda and Bangladesh, and it has spread very widely since then. But the origins of Reflect were always in the work of the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, who was referenced at the beginning by Stefania, and fundamentally an understanding that literacy is a political process, that there is no such thing as a neutral education, and that when adults in particular are coming to a learning environment, the lack of literacy is just one manifestation of the injustices that they face through their lives, and that you can't deal with the literacy in isolation of a wider process of empowerment. And I think that's been emphasized very well by other speakers, and need to very much strongly. I think it's how the literacy and empowerment processes interweave, and that's really about making sure that the learning process is absolutely relevant to the particular context and environment of each of the learners. And for that to happen, you need to do away with the sort of pre-printed textbooks or primers or materials from outside, and have a participatory process where learners can generate their own learning materials and connect a process of learning with a process of empowerment. And that in constant interaction between a sort of reflection process and an action process, this praxis that Freire talks about. When we're talking about challenging power, I think increasingly with Reflect practice, we've talked about addressing visible, invisible, and hidden power. So the visible power of the state, the hidden power in many cases of, say, corporate actors, and the invisible power of ideas and attitudes of patriarchy, of things that actually keep people, the attitudes and behaviors that bind people. We need to challenge power in all of those levels. I want to absolutely emphasize, and this has come through very strongly in the Reflect practice, that it's very dangerous to talk about any sort of dichotomy between illiteracy and literacy, that it is a spectrum. This is something that was reaffirmed in the last Confintea meeting, the Conference on Adult Education, that we need to understand literacy as a spectrum, and we need to talk about literacies. It's about strengthening people's capacity to communicate through whatever medium is most relevant to them. It may be about literacy, it may be about language, it may be about access to different tools of communication, especially in this digital age. And I think perhaps the thing which comes through, one of the things which is really clear from our practice with Reflect is that you're never going to make progress with short-term campaigns. The key thing with any process of effective adult learning is a sustained investment over a sustained period of time. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we face. And those challenges will get worse in the context of COVID. I think we already know, and Stefania has highlighted this at the beginning, that education budgets overall will be under massive pressure as a result of cuts to GDP. Overall economic contraction will mean a reduction in education budgets. Most likely, and the sad truth is that when education budgets are constrained, it is often the adult education that suffers first. Adult learning, adult education is the thing which is sacrificed, whilst spending on formal education is more likely to be protected. I think that that's a mistake in any circumstances, but I think the bigger mistake is to accept any of these constraints in the future spending on education. What we need, and one of the questions and comments that came in earlier was, it's not about going back to how things were in the past, because we have faced public education systems that have been chronically underfunded for a generation. We need to use this COVID moment for a transformation in financing of education overall, within which adult education needs to be a central part. We need to move away from that conception of education as something which is a sort of pre-injection that you give to children and then they're okay through the rest of their lives. It is something which needs to be lifelong and involve people at every stage of their lives and connected with their lives, their livelihoods and their environment. But if we're going to get to that, we need a complete radical rethink of the financing of education. That is partly to do with the budget shares that governments allocate to education. There are far too many countries that spend shockingly low percentages of their budget on education, and they need to be getting up to the recommended benchmark from Incheon of 15 to 20%, probably exceeding 20% of national budgets spent on education. But the biggest problem is that we're so focused on that share, that a 20% share of a very small budget is a very small amount. And what we really need to do is to talk more and build people's confidence as education advocates to engage in those bigger pictures of how can you expand the size of the national budgets overall through making, through action on tax justice, for example, expanding tax to GDP ratios. In some countries, in many countries, if you expanded by 5%, your tax to GDP ratio by 5%, you could double spending on education and health and on other public services. And if we're serious about the case for investments in education, then we need the education advocates to become, to work closely with tax justice advocates. We also, particularly at this moment, I think, need to work closely with debt campaigners, because it is madness that countries have got revenues sitting in their own budgets, that they are having to pay back old debts with that money, rather than being able to invest in a comprehensive response to COVID in their own context. UNCTAD reckons it's about $1 trillion that will be given away in debt repayments over the next 2 years by countries affected by COVID. So we need action on debt and on debt justice. We need tax justice. We do need to make progress also, I think, on pushing back on economic models of austerity that the IMF continue to uphold. We need to push back on the public sector wage bill constraints that hold down spending on public sector workers. And we do need to look at investments which are more sensitive to where the priorities are. Now, the most powerful investments in education, the ones which make the biggest difference, are ones which are driven by a concern for increasing equity. And if one is serious about increasing equity through education, then actually working to prioritize adult learning for those who have not had an opportunity for education earlier in life should be a major priority. So we need to have a comprehensive look at the financing, not just of education, but how education sits within the wider public services agenda. And we need to make the case for massive new investments in lifelong learning. Call to action that 190 organizations have signed, that was launched today on International Literacy Day. And I will share that link in the chat box again. I did so earlier, but I'll share it again for those who are interested.
Thank you, David. If you can, just a word to conclude.
Yeah, indeed, a final word to conclude. So the fundamental aspects of the reflect approach to adult learning are, recognize the political nature of education and the transformative potential of education. But if we're going to make education into a transformative force that increases equality, we need equality within that education financing first. So there's an interdependency between those things. And that, I think, is the struggle of this moment post-COVID.
Thank you. Thanks for recalling some, I would say, key principle in relation to really adult literacy and adult learning, the importance of conceiving actions as really participatory programs where learners are also, actors of their own learning process. The importance also of changing the view of literacy, about literacy and illiteracy, and really drop, finally this dichotomous view of literacy. The fact that there is no short-term action, this kind of old vision of campaigns and how literacy campaigns can actually solve a problem. It needs to be rather a sustained long-term policy and long-term investment, and it has to be placed within a lifelong learning vision. And this is something that UNESCO is promoting very much, and clearly since 2015 with the adoption of the SDGs and SDG 4, this is really a guiding principle for designing all interventions in the field of literacy, which need also to take into account the broader issue of education financing, not only in terms of education budget, but in terms of the size of a government budget and the income, the sources of income to actually finance public policies. So thanks, David, for this overview of also the lessons learned from so many years now of practice with Reflect. I think that the panelists gave us quite a comprehensive vision and understanding of the issue, but also with the different approaches now, and how we can actually rethink, literacy and learning in the context of literacy programs. To end this session, now we're going to look at the questions that were posed by our participants, and I'm going to actually propose each of the panelists to answer one question. Je vais commencer avec vous, Monsieur Mafaka Touré, si vous voulez bien.
There was a question about Senegal's experience, and in particular, the country's experience in terms of making use of experience. Could you tell us how that scheme that's called VAE actually works in your country? Mr. Touré, we can't hear you. Right, now we can. Go ahead. Well, Senegal has a long experience with this VAE approach in literacy teaching. I said we run a lot of studies and research in this area. I've been lucky enough to be involved myself going back to 2013, but even prior to that, we had a lot of experience of what's called USE, which is a major NGO that since 1985 has been working in this area. It works on national languages and many other areas, and in fact is working with French universities, providing training up to postgraduate and doctorate level. So this experience exists, and it also does in the area of vocational training with what we call master artisans, master craftsmen. They are issuing diplomas and certification right now. At this moment in time, there's cooperation with a major corporation, French corporation working in Senegal. They have been entrusted with this training and certification process. So the experience is there. Thank you very much for that input. Very useful. I'll now turn.
Mrs. Kalman, you actually in the presentation referred to the fact that digital pedagogy, digital resources can be used even when there is no connectivity. And several participants wanted to know more about what you meant exactly and how in concrete terms this can actually happen.
Yes, thank you for that question. My point is that we often think of connectivity right away and we lose sight of the fact that computers and digital technologies are very important and powerful mediators. In other words, they are artifacts that we can use and that contain tools, lots of different kinds of tools and environments for producing things. And it is through activity where learning actually takes place. So instead of thinking of a computer as a vehicle for distributing materials, I think we need to think of it as an environment for learning. And so our job as educators is to create context where learners, through active participation in the terms that David Archer was speaking of, can be involved and contribute to what they're learning and how they're learning it, and making choices and decisions and living with those choices and decisions. And when your decisions aren't always the best ones, and you need the opportunity to go back and do it again. I think the idea of knowledge construction is important because the tendency is to think in terms of transmitting things. So to speak in more concrete terms, I'm thinking specifically of actually things we have done where we create situations where we ask students or teachers, depending if we're doing teacher, we're promoting teacher learning, and please note that I'm not saying training, teacher learning, or working directly with students, creating situations where the participants have to produce things. And on the computer, there can be, especially for those places where there are not other kinds of resources, because the computer does have the capacity to store things and to display tools and environments for producing things, to be able to use what they're doing, to be able to do things such as, and I'll give you some concrete examples. For example,
I'm afraid we won't have the time for the specific examples because we have only 5 minutes left. So
well, I only have 3 examples, but that's okay.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Thomas, a question that was posed based on your presentation on the role and the importance of the family environment. How does that actually play? How does it actually affect the learning for adults? In other words, what can neuroscientists say about family learning for adults?
So the family environment is really important for supporting the other 90% of literacy acquisition where one is practicing reading. It needs to be relevant for individuals. If the family environment has resources for literacy, if the family values the practice of spending time learning to read, then it provides much more opportunity for learning to read to become relevant to the individual. Indeed, we know that sometimes parents learn to read to support their children's education, and that gives them a reason to practice. So it is essential. We know in some studies that just the number of books in the household can predict the rate of literacy acquisition. So I would think family support is as important of any of these small things about how the letters go to sounds. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like now to turn to Mrs. Dige. One of your starting points was actually to stress the importance of having specific approaches and responses for specific vulnerable groups. We have a question about this, actually, challenging this view and asking if there is not a risk of really fragmenting the target populations through such a compartmentalized approach, rather than having a comprehensive and really truly inclusive approach that would actually address all the different groups, while at the same time recognizing some of the specificities. So in other words, is the targeted, differentiated approach for public policies in the field of literacy really the best?
Well, that's a good question, but experience is showing that when you don't specify the marginalized groups, they tend to get left out, and because they lack the self-confidence, they don't even feel the need to become literate. So it is very important to target them and to say that the literacy program is going to is specifically aimed for them. Even in a class, for instance, when there is interaction between the learners, you would find that it is those who have slightly better literacy skills, or in the Indian context, it would definitely be the upper caste groups that would tend to dominate, or if it's a male and a female mixed group, then it would be the men who would dominate. And that is why it is absolutely essential. Our experience is showing that first you must work with women separately in a group, and later on it is possible when they feel confident enough, they feel that they can be part of a larger group, then the men and the women can certainly come together. But initially, I think that targeting is necessary.
Thank you. Thank you for this clarification. The last, point is for you, for David Archer. The Reflect approach actually is very much based on, participation, involvement of the learner, interaction between the learners and between the learners and the facilitator. In the context of COVID-19, where most of programs have been disrupted, how to maintain, the essence of the approach?
No, it's undoubtedly very, very challenging, and I think Reflect processes in many countries have been suspended alongside any more conventional literacy, adult learning classes, and also, of course, schools. One hopes that will change in the short term. There have been some creative ways in which facilitators have come up with use of online and socially distanced participatory techniques, but I don't think that is that widespread at the moment. I wanted to sort of pick up also though on what Anita was saying, and I think it's absolutely right. And when I look, you need to make focused efforts to support the most marginalized, and there are groups within any literacy or learning group which will be less powerful than others within that same group. So in a sense, one of the first challenges we have is to make the learning space into a democratic space where everyone's voice is equal. Now, that itself is countercultural. It is a challenging thing. You need to actively construct learning spaces that are inclusive and democratic. And this goes right to the heart of why the literacy literacy is so closely linked to the practice of power. It is almost impossible. When you think about the different ways in which literacy and numeracy are used in daily life, in all sorts of contexts, it's close to power. So when you have groups of people who feel outside of that power and don't believe that change is possible, they don't see the value of learning literacy because they don't believe. So actually the act of learning literacy is linked to an act of belief that change is possible, and we need to make sure that we link the learning to a process that will accelerate that wider change.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's about advancing the process of change. So
thank you for stressing this point and for recalling the social dimension of literacy, which is key. We have now reached the end of our session. In closing, I would like to stress an important element in the context of COVID-19. I mean, what we have actually observed through the survey, the quick survey that Lauren Chakroun introduced in the first session, is that in most countries, in fact, literacy programs have actually suffered the most, and all the attention has been placed for schools and for UNESCO, and this has been really the message that we are trying to promote and to disseminate throughout the world. It's important that member states adopt really a holistic approach and build responses which are truly actually comprehensive, inclusive, that look at the education sector from a lifelong perspective, including adult education, including literacy programs, which are really at the most at risk to be abandoned in a context where they are already underfunded. So again, it's important to maintain this policy attention, but also to maintain the investment and the support to this sector. I would like to thank all the panelists for very rich presentations. Sorry for sometimes being a little abrupt in asking you to actually summarize and come to the conclusion. Unfortunately, we didn't have, probably enough time for a very stimulating and important topic. So thanks to all of you. And now I would like to give back the floor to Laureate Chakroun for, closing this session before we move to the next event. Laureate, over to you.
Merci, David. It's hard to summarize the rich discussion that we just had, and I wouldn't attempt to do so. But maybe I would like, in the conclusion of our meeting today, highlight at least three takeaways that I believe are important. The first one is that the COVID-19 has magnified challenges that literacy had before the crisis. That's the lack of policy attention, the low recognition of the teachers and their qualification, the lack of resources allocated, its fragmentation as well. But there are new challenges that the COVID put forward. The low readiness of a literacy program and literacy community to move to distance learning. The challenge of the educators in terms of their qualification and skills, but also their status during the crisis because of the fragility of their contracts or the way the working environment is established. So there is we see that in our discussion we have re-emphasized some of the challenges that we had before the crisis, but some of them have been magnified and new challenges have came, and it's very important that through our discussion, through the advocacy, we highlight those new challenges. The second point, which I think important, is that there is a need to leverage new knowledge and new evidence. And I think that what we have heard from our colleague Michael Thomas, regarding what we can learn from the neurosciences. We didn't speak today about data analytics, artificial intelligence, and other technology that are emerging that can support individual learning, including in the 90% of time spent in education and learning at home or in other learning setting than the face-to-face. So leveraging the well-established knowledge, and we spoke about Paulo Freire, we spoke about a different the initiative and knowledge that we have already accumulated since many years. But I think we need also to leverage these new evidence and new knowledges. And the third takeaway, I believe, is about investment. Today, we know that there will be a challenge regarding financing. I think that the point that we have highlighted and David and other colleagues have mentioned about the already low resources allocated to literacy within the education budget. But that there is a risk that education budget themselves will be affected. And that means also much less resources to adult literacy and programs and adult learning more broadly. So the question is how to invest in an equitable way, how to ensure that the most marginalized will benefit from the little resources, if there are little resources allocated to education, although our role is to raise the voice to ensure that education budgets are protected, that literacy in this context is protected. So for me, these are three takeaways that are important to keep, and that I hope we will be able to build on based on the work we are doing, and also the new survey that we are planning to conduct together with our colleagues at the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning to measure a bit the impact of the COVID on adult learning and literacy learning in specifically. Dear colleagues, we are at the end of our meeting today. We are a bit late for 5 minutes, but I think it was worth it. Let me thank the speakers, thank also the participant, thank the team that organized this meeting and spent the summertime in getting the speakers contacted and organizing the different pieces of work that we have prepared, the background paper that is also available based on the survey that we have conducted. Our engagement doesn't stop here. We are, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are having a second meeting, which is a webinar to celebrate the laureate of the International Literacy Prizes, understand what are these programs, what they brought in, what we can take away from their initiative, and how we can leverage their expertise. We are taking around 25 minutes break, and we should resume the International Literacy Prizes webinar at 4 o'clock Paris time. And please stay tuned, stay with us, and come back for the International Literacy Prizes webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you to all colleagues. Thanks to all the speakers and all the participants. Stay well and come back in 25 minutes. Bye.
Thank you very much.
L'enregistrement a été interrompu. Cette conversation va être enregistrée. L'enregistrement a été interrompu.
Hola Mirta. Hello Mirta, can you hear me? Hello, Ambassador.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Okay, great.
Thank you. We wanted to test a bit the sound.
It works.
Okay, since it's working well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Che.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Hola, Mirta. Can you hear me? Cannot hear you. Your mic is muted. Oh, you must be on the Spanish. Hello? Yes, okay, I can hear you. Hola. Oh, Mirta? Mr. Abdul Rahman?
Yes.
Yes,
How
okay,
are
we can,
you?
yeah, we can hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Yeah, Mr. Azare, are you here with us? Okay, let's try. Tim, are you here? Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yes.
Good afternoon. Great. Welcome. Mirta? Can't hear you, or you're mute. Okay, no problem. Yes.
Hola, hola.
Hola.
¿Sí me escuchas?
Sí, muy bien.
Ok.
Está bien. Gracias. Okay. So, Mr. Azare, are you here with us? Yeah, Mr. Krishna, are you here with us as well?
We can't hear.
Mr. Azare, can you open your mic, please?
Okay.
Mr. Azare, can you hear me? Please turn on your mic.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
hear you.
great, thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, Rana.
I thought it was on the hour. I don't have a presentation. Are we live?
Yes.
Hello.
Don't worry. It's just a test.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, boy. Seems it's working well. Thank you, Rana.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Krishna, are you here?
Good evening from Nepal. I don't know, you may be good morning or whatever you have. I greet you all.
Thank you, sir. Yes, afternoon here in France. Thank you.
Antoine, on commence.
Ok.
Stéphane est là?
Pas encore. Je vais aller voir. All good, Boren.
Excellencies,
Cette conversation va être enregistrée.
ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome to the International Literacy Prize webinar and ceremony. We are very pleased to have you with us today. My name is Boran Shakroun. I'm the director of the Division for Policy and Lifelong Learning Systems. Thank you for the colleagues who stayed with us from the previous meeting, and welcome to the new colleagues who joined us for the ceremony and the webinar. Let me acknowledge the participation and the presence and the support of His Excellency Mr. Dong Ji Kim, Ambassador and Permanent Delegate of the Republic of Korea to UNESCO. I would like also to acknowledge and thank the presence of His Excellency Mr. Jin Yang, Ambassador and Permanent Delegate of the People's Republic of China to UNESCO. I would like also to acknowledge the participation and the presence of Ms. Rana Dajani, Chair of the International Jury and Professor at the Hashemite University in Jordan. And of course, I would like to thank my Assistant Director General, Madame Stefania Giannini, for her support, her presence, and for joining us today for this ceremony as well. Dear colleagues, we will start with a Director General video, and then we'll move to the other items of our agenda today. Please, if you can broadcast the video.
Bonjour à tous. I'm delighted to join you to honor the laureates of UNESCO International Literacy Prizes, and I warmly congratulate all of this year's winners. The International Literacy Day is taking place this year in exceptional circumstances, which underline how important our action for literacy really is. The pandemic has created an unprecedented educational crisis, which has prevented nearly 1.6 billion learners from attending school all around the world. An entire generation is facing educational disruption. This is especially concerning for the 617 million young people who lack basic skills in reading and math, who had such high expectations for this academic year. Because literacy is an essential prerequisite for all progress. But today, 773 million adults, 2/3 of them women, are deprived of these basic rights. As Frederick Douglass, a former American slave, wrote in the 19th century, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." This conviction that literacy is the first step towards freedom is one shared by our laureates. Whether they use everyday objects, mother languages, inspiring testimonies, or community libraries, our laureates this year have helped vulnerable populations, including refugees and elderly people, to overcome the effect of the crisis. They have helped those most in need acquire this basic skill, the ability to read and write. I would therefore like to congratulate our winners who have changed the destinies of thousands of people, from Ghana to Mexico, from Nepal to Myanmar and Yemen. But I would also like to pay tribute to those we have been unable to acknowledge, even though they work towards the same goal. These prizes are also yours. Lastly, I would like to thank the governments of the Republic of Korea and of the People's Republic of China for their support for the UNESCO King Sejong Prize and the UNESCO Confucius Prize for Literacy, respectively. Thanks to their commitment, we've been able to reward these efforts in favor of one of UNESCO's key priorities for 54 years. I wish you all a very happy International Literacy Day. Thank you.
Thank you to Director Jean for her video message and for conveying critical messages related to the International Literacy Prizes. Dear colleagues, let me remind that those prizes were created and that the literacy prizes were created back in 1967. And as of today, we have around 495 programs who have been recognized as innovative and creative initiative to advance literacy all over the world. Through the prestigious prizes, UNESCO seeks to support effective literacy practices and encourages the promotion of dynamic literate societies. Let me also remind you that for this year, we have launched the UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize and the Confucius Prize. The call for nomination was launched on May 14th. We have received more than 76 applications. The jury members, chaired by Ms. Dajani, met in July to select the laureates, and today we'll be celebrating and we'll be listening to the presentation from those laureates. Let me remind also that for the call for proposal, we had two major questions. One was, what are the main enabling factors that have made teaching and learning of youth and adult literacy relevant and effective? And what are the challenges faced by the winning programs? The second is, in the context of the current COVID-19 crisis and beyond, how can the program be adjusted or enhanced to ensure the continuity of meaningful literacy teaching and learning for youth and adults? So these are the twin themes that we have tried to cover this year. Let me now give the floor to ADG Giannini for her opening remarks. Please, Madame Giannini.
Thank you very much, Buren. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have discussed this during International Literacy Day meeting about a lot of new challenges. So we are living today actually in challenging times. But challenging times, on the other side, are also time of opportunities, also time for leverage innovation and leadership. And I believe that the International Literacy Day this year is an opportunity to advocate for literacy and advance SDG 4, particularly about the targets that are more related to the issues that in this unprecedented situation we are talking about. Since their establishment, UNESCO Literacy Prizes have played a crucial role in mapping innovative programs, in documenting the adopted approaches, and also ensuring dissemination of the many lessons learned. The COVID-19 shows the fragility, as many said today, the fragility of our societies and the fragility of all education systems. And it also shows this crisis the importance of peer learning and knowledge sharing. This is also the critical contribution of UNESCO's literacy prizes. I'm really pleased now to introduce to the laureates of this edition 2020, UNESCO International Literacy Prizes. The 5 laureates of this year's UNESCO International Literacy Programs that you are recognizing today are inspiring examples. They are examples which demonstrate that solutions do exist to provide access to the fundamental human right of literacy and to leave no one behind. I'd like to express my deep appreciation and sincere thanks to the government of the Republic of Korea for its support in organizing the UNESCO King Sejong Literary Prize, as well to the government of the People's Republic of China for its support regarding the UNESCO Confucius Prize for Literacy. Allow me also to thank the members of the jury for their great job in education. This year, the UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize is awarded to two laureates. First of all, to the organization Aging Nepal in Nepal for its basic literacy class for older persons program, which has served 180 elders with no or poor literacy skills since 2016. Second, to the British NGO United World Schools for its program providing non-Burmese speaking out-of-school children access to education, which provides education opportunities to children in Shan State by working with communities where almost all children don't speak Burmese. This year, the UNESCO Confucius Prize for Literacy is awarded to three laureates. First of all, to the Jessica Mead Foundation in Ghana for its program Inspirational Business Stories, which aims to empower youth and children through innovative and sustainable business development of entrepreneurial skills as well. Then to the literacy program Learning by Teaching of the University Center for Social Participation in Mexico, which provides training programs for college students to instill a social conscience and contribute to social change. Last but really not least, we are rewarding the educating and integrating refugees in literacy classes in Yemeni society program implemented by the General Literacy Office in Sana'a in Yemen, which enrolls refugees in literacy classes and provides activities related to learning the basics of the Arabic language and numeracy skills. I wish to express my deep gratitude to each of the 5 laureates. I'm really convinced that your programs will definitely inspire further trials, further initiatives, further commitment, and they can help make literacy learning opportunities accessible to all in the current challenging times and beyond. I thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias, señora Giannini. Veamos ahora el video.
Now take a look at the video from the laureate.
Are we able to launch the video? Thank you. Let me now give the floor to Ms. Rana Dajani, the chair of the Literacy Prizes. Please, Madame Dajani.
Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. To this year's 2020 theme of the International Literacy Day is literacy, teaching, and learning in the COVID-19 crisis and beyond, the role of educators in changing pedagogies. As a member and chair of the jury, we received 76 nominations from 5 different regions around the world: Africa, Asia and the Pacific, the Arab region, Europe, North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We spent almost 5 days reading every submission, debating, engaging, searching, discussing, and enjoying reading all the wonderful people and their efforts and what they're doing on the ground. The applications were all grassroots, and that's the best. It's all about bottom up. It's about having that agency of wanting to make a difference in our own lives, each one in their own community, in their own culture, in their own context. Because those are the people in the grassroots who know better what are the challenges and know better what are the root causes, and therefore are better equipped to develop solutions that can be sustainable and that really impactful and really make a difference. Also, many of these applications were very innovative, and we need innovation more than ever today, because all the education framework is not very solid. We know there are so many changes in the past, and with COVID-19, all the cracks are even more obvious. And we know that going forward in the future, with and without COVID-19, we are in need of making a difference in how we administer education. Therefore, all these innovative ideas and work and efforts are very, very much in need. Today, we look at the world from a system change point of view. We're looking at trying to find the pivotal points, the root causes, so that we can enable system change to make a difference. And this requires holistic approaches that connect to everyday life, not just separating disciplines into silos. And examples of these are some of our laureates from Ghana and Mexico, who address not just education per se, but connect it to everyday life in terms of business and what to do. Also, I mean, both awards impact the native language, which also impacts identity, and is so important today because of globalization. And here we have the example of Yemen working on Arabic language. Also, the award talks about involving every members of the community, females, elderly, as the awardee from Nepal, parents, especially today with COVID-19, the importance of their role in the education of their children, people with disabilities, refugees, as in the Yemen example. Therefore, when we look at education, it's all about lifelong learning. It goes beyond the walls of the school and spills over to everyday life. It doesn't stop when school ends and everybody starts a job. It is continuous all the time, as the example in Burma, which tells us about it takes a village to help educate a child. So it's been actually a pleasure and an honor and a privilege and very humbling to read all the applications and to get to know them personally. And I'm speaking on behalf of all the jury members, who I was very proud to work with going through this. And it actually made us feel very grateful and very optimistic. With all the negative media and with all the atrocities that is going on around the world, it gave us a sense of optimism that the world is in a better place because of the wonderful people working on the ground that we may not know about, but are actually there. Therefore, to the awardees, to the 5 awardees, I also encourage them and recommend them to use this platform, this prize, to reach out and engage with the world around them, with every stakeholder, every person who can actually learn from them, and they can learn from them as well. And I also ask the audience, everybody attending, and the whole world who will listen to this event, to reach out and engage with our awardees and other people, because this is the only way we can go together, which is working in a team. And today, because we are all connected digitally and using Zoom or other platforms, this makes it easier to connect with every person around the world. Therefore, as a former awardee from 2017 for the King Sejong Award, as founder of We Love Reading, a program that works to change mindsets through reading to create change makers, I encourage everybody to read everywhere, every time to everyone around you, because that's the only way we can go forward to make a difference. And every person, every awardee, every applicant, every person is a butterfly who is making a difference in their own way, in their own community. And that's the butterfly effect. When a butterfly flutters its wing in China, there's a hurricane in the Atlantic. So I encourage you all to go out and make a difference. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dajani, for these inspiring words. Dear colleagues, we are moving to the next item, which is about the laureate of the UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize. Let me remind you that the UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize was established in 1989. The prize is named in honor of King Sejong of Korea, who was responsible for the creation of the Korean alphabet Hangul in the 15th century. The prize, which recognizes two laureates, pays special attention to the development and use of mother tongue literacy, education, and training. To have introductory remark, we have the pleasure and the honor to have His Excellency Mr. Dongji Kim, Ambassador and Permanent Delegate of the Republic of Korea. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madame Stefania Giannini, Assistant Director General for Education of UNESCO. His Excellency Mr. Yang Jin, Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to UNESCO. Mr. Rana Dajani, Chair of the International Jury. Excellencies, dear laureates, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to be here with you today from many different parts of the world for this online award ceremony of 2020 UNESCO International Literacy Prizes. On behalf of the Republic of Korea, I am honored to reward two laureates of the UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize, and I also congratulate 3 laureates of the UNESCO Confucius Prize for Literacy. The first laureate of King Sejong Literacy Prize is Aging Nepal for its remarkable project called Basic Literacy Class for Older Persons and Program. The program demonstrated highly effective teaching and learning method for the aging population based on everyday interaction in real life situation. The second laureate is United World Schools, United Kingdom-based education charity, awarded for providing access to education for non-Burmese speaking children from remote villages who speak only indigenous language with low learning opportunity. These 2 exceptional projects will be shared with various institutions around the world as successful examples of experiential learning and innovative mother language-based literacy program. In particular, these examples will inspire and encourage the international education community struck by COVID-19 and serve as beacons of light in these challenging times. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, since UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize was established in 1989, the prize has contributed to the promotion of literacy education. The prize is named in commemoration of King Sejong the Great, who had invented the unique Korean alphabet, one of the easiest phonetic characters in the world, Hangul, for his people. He understood that the literacy is something more than the simple ability to read and write. Literacy is a gate to the world. Literacy transforms the lives of people by allowing them to live and participate fully in society, and by empowering them to make informed choices and to improve their livelihoods. This year, education systems worldwide are affected by COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing education disparities by reducing the opportunities for many of the most vulnerable children, youth, and adults to continue their learning. In this unprecedented education crisis, we must recall that the right of education is a universal human right, irrespective of age and ethnicity. Literacy is a primary agent for just, equal, inclusive, peaceful societies. It is now the responsibility of all education stakeholders and the international community to restore and rebuild the ground to ensure continuity of learning and literacy for all. We must work together to overcome this crisis by deploying innovative solutions such as distance learning and utilization of advanced tools of information society. Ladies and gentlemen, this year the King Sejong Literacy Prize was renewed for another period of 60 years at the last session of UNESCO Executive Board. The Republic of Korea pledged its stronger support by increasing the number of winners and donations for the prize. Once again, let me congratulate the laureates of 2020 UNESCO International Literacy Prizes. I would also like to commend remarkable efforts of the Secretariat in these difficult and turbulent times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for these important points and messages that you kindly shared with us. I believe that the laureates and all the participants have been listening very carefully to the different elements that you kindly shared with us today. Let us then move to the laureate and start with Mr. Krishna Gautam, founder chairperson of Aging Nepal. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. And your distinguished chair, excellencies, laureates, and friends, greetings from Nepal. I feel honored to represent Aging Nepal, that has been running the basic literacy class for older illiterate adults with support of many organizations and individuals since the program started in 2016. I take this opportunity to thank all those involved, especially Mr. Jack Kupferman, who remained the backbone of this program throughout. I will now present the program background. A retired UN official named Virginia Hazard bequeathed a fund to support older adults in least developed countries. The NGO Committee on Aging in New York at the United Nations managed the fund. The person responsible there contacted the UNESCO Institute of Lifelong Learning, and they sent out a call for proposal for the grant in 2015. We're lucky. Our proposal got the grant, and we started the first round of literacy class for older person in 2016 with 30 illiterate older adults using the available textbooks. The first results were not very encouraging. So we started looking for better ways, which led us to Professor Helen Abadji, a retired cognitive psychologist of the World Bank. She is reputed for her work on perceptual enhancement and has developed textbooks in 9 different languages and scripts in various countries. For our additional small award from the NGO Committee on Aging allowed us to put the outcome of our research on the perceptual enhancement in practice. Under her guidance, we developed a network, new textbooks, and retrained our teachers on perceptual enhancement team. We replicated the class with a new set of 30 older illiterates in a new community. It was easier for our new learners with the tools specifically designed to suit the cognitive attributes of older adults. They scored higher marks in their subsequent test. Since then, we have replicated the class each year with new sets of 30 older illiterates in different communities around Kathmandu Valley. We noticed that illiteracy is more common among older women. We experience that it is a lot easier to get support from local communities that have closely observed the sufferings of older illiterates. Our main challenge has been the mythical or stereotype or traditional mindset that views education and training as important for children and adults, but not so for older adults of 60 plus age. The present day society functions as if illiterates don't exist. This mindset lives behind the millions of illiterate older adults across the globe. It goes against the UN call for leave no one behind. I also believe that we cannot achieve Sustainable Development Goals 2030 without the wisdom and experience of our senior citizens of 60 plus age. Denying the basic human right to education and training for older adults would be an ageism in practice that we all stand against. Denying access to basic and digital literacy to older adults also means denying them the benefits of technological innovations and leaving them to suffer isolation, abuse, early dependency, and ill health in their old age. Today's youth will also need a robust education system that will enable them to benefit from new technologies in the future when they grow old. So we argue for the proportionate share of resources for lifelong learning. It is still very rare to find targeted education and training for the aging population in national education policies and programs of most countries, including my own. We in Aging Nepal strive to change this. Lastly, I would appeal to provide a due share of priority to the lifelong learning needs of the ever-growing aging population of 60 plus of today and tomorrow. In pre or post COVID pandemic situation, because I think this type of pandemics will be reoccurring many times in the future. But we have been, older people has been left out all the way in our education system, in our national education system. I wonder why. So, irrespective of whether it is pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, pre-disaster or post-disaster, in all situations, all types of all disasters and pandemic, I think we should continue to emphasize the lifelong learning of all people of all ages, irrespective of their age. They need education and training to be able to participate in the mainstream society. We cannot leave them behind.
Thank you so much.
Leaving them behind is, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Mr. Krishna for these inspiring words and the emphasis regarding aging persons and their needs in lifelong learning perspective. Thank you so much for your intervention. Let me move to the second laureate, and I would like to invite Mr. Tim Howarth, Chief Executive Officer, United World Schools from United Kingdom. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thank you in particular to His Excellency, Mr. Dong Ji Kim, for that very kind introduction, and also to colleagues at UNESCO for convening everybody today. It's absolutely fantastic to see these conversations on the International Day of Literacy as such an important topic. We're absolutely inspired to be a laureate, and for a little bit of context, the challenge that we face is we work with very, very remote communities in Myanmar, as well as Cambodia and Nepal, and we help ethnic minority communities to develop schools. One of the biggest challenges we face is that 100% of the children in many of the communities in which we work do not speak the national language. And therefore they're unable to attend a government, for example, a Burmese-speaking government school. Now, we've been operating the Shan state of Myanmar to help many of these communities, and since 2013, we've managed to develop schools for 68 communities that are serving around 4,000 children who don't speak Burmese as their mother tongue. One of the enabling factors is our partnership work, and particularly partnering with our communities to just focus on not just the building of the schools, but also the running of the schools. And that means employing local community members, particularly women and girls, to serve as teachers and to offer students a chance to access the national curriculum initially in their national language. So these community teachers that we employ work alongside teachers provided by the government, and taking a gradualist approach, we raise the levels of Burmese that is used in the classroom so that by grade 4, our aim is to have students functional in both the national language as well as their mother tongue language. And that enables them to survive in both the local context, their local community, as well as Burmese only environments. And so throughout the life of the project, which eventually these schools will become government schools. So throughout the life of the project, when we work with these communities, our community teachers receive support from our education officers, who spend several days each month with our communities to deliver workshops, deliver literacy classes, to observe teaching and feedback. And our education officers are all Burmese nationals, and they are typically from a teaching background. They've also been brought up and deeply understand the challenge of having Burmese as a second or third language, which means they are very, very well placed to be highly sensitive to the challenges that the communities that we work with face. And of course, the challenges that these communities have faced have been absolutely under the spotlight with COVID-19. And the close relationship that we have with our communities means that our community support officers are uniquely positioned to be a trusted source of guidance to help communities manage COVID-19 in an empowered way. And our model for United World Schools, our model is all about community involvement. And actually that's coped really well with the challenges that COVID-19 has presented, with our teachers taking on a range of new opportunities and responsibilities. And with the remote support of our community teachers, often just simply by a telephone call, our education officers have been able to provide that vital information to our community leaders, to our teachers, to help communities manage things like the healthcare challenge as we get our schools up and running again and bounce back so that we can continue the learning in the school environment when it's safe to do so. So across all of our 3 countries' operations since COVID-19 hit, we've now managed to reach an estimated 148,000 people with with really good, key, important messages all about the virus. But also we managed to open up World Health Organization standard hand washing facilities in 210 of our schools, and that's there for the long term. And doing so in partnership with our local communities will empower them for the long term to help manage these kind of challenges, because we know there will be more challenges, and therefore the better people are able to manage these challenges, the more sustainable our projects are, and the more we'll have long-term impact for these communities, ultimately driving things like literacy as we move forward. So finally, to finish, thank you very, very much to everybody for joining today. Thank you to UNESCO colleagues for this incredibly important award. We are at United World Schools absolutely honoured to receive this award. We're inspired to be part of this process. We're inspired by our fellow laureates as well. So thank you to everybody for driving literacy forward on today, the International Day of Literacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Huarth, and thank you for the nice smile behind you, which we can see. It's very nice to see the smile of the kids, and I believe your program is inspiring them. Dear colleagues, we move now to the next prize, an important prize, UNESCO Confucius Prize for Literacy. Let me remind you that the UNESCO Confucius Prize was established in 2005. The prize named in honor of the famous Chinese philosopher. It recognizes 3 laureates and gives special consideration to literacy amongst adults in rural areas and out-of-school youth, particularly girls and women. And I have the pleasure and the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jin Yang. I'm pleased that our road crossed again. The floor is yours, Excellency.
The ADG Giannini, our Mrs. Rana Tajani, the chair of the international jury, Excellencies, laureates of the 2020 International Literacy Prizes, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all from Paris. It is a great honor for me to join you in celebrating the International Literacy Day through this online event on the laureates of the 2020 UNESCO Literacy Prizes. First of all, please allow me to extend my warmest congratulations to the winners of the year 2020 UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize and UNESCO Confucius Literacy Prize. Literacy is an intrinsic part of the right to education and a key enabler for achieving all the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. It is all the more imperative for us to reiterate the pivotal importance of literacy under the context of the global pandemic of COVID-19, which has unprecedentedly hit the least advantaged the hardest. Ladies and gentlemen, China has always attached great importance to literacy and education and prioritized education in national development strategy. Confucius believed that there should be education for everyone without distinction. With years of efforts, China has achieved comprehensive elimination of youth adult illiteracy throughout the country. By 2011, the progress in literacy education has contributed significantly to the overall social and economic development in China. During the pandemic, the Chinese government has implemented an initiative enabling all schools to put online platforms into full play to continue literacy and educational programs. with the aim to support the literacy efforts worldwide and to emulate best practices in the developing countries. China, in collaboration with UNESCO, established the Confucius Prize for Literacy. Since its commencement in 2006, 38 programs from 29 countries have been awarded the prize. Today, I'm very elated to see that the programs from Mexico, Yemen, and Ghana won this year's award. I sincerely believe these extraordinary practices will bring inspirations to the international community. Taking this opportunity, I would also like to commend UNESCO, including the headquarters, field offices, and the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, where I had the luck to work for 6 years there, for their leading role in global literacy development and in achieving SDG 4, ensure inclusive, equitable, quality education, and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. China will certainly continue to render its firm support to UNESCO's effort in this regard, and to work together with all member states to build a community of a shared future for mankind. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Yang, for these important words. Thank you to the People's Republic of China for all the support, the continuous support to our work in education, and specifically in literacy, and all the support that we are receiving to make the Confucius Prize a successful prize. Without delay, I would like to give the floor to the first laureate, Mr. Janice Asare, President, Just Commit Foundation from Ghana. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
The UNESCO Assistant Director General for Education, Ms. Stefania Giannini, the Chair of the International Jury and Associate Professor of Hashemite University, Jordan, Ms. Rana Najani, His Excellency Mr. S. Yangjin, the Impediment Delegate of the Republic of Korea to UNESCO, His Excellency Mr. Dongye Kim, the UNESCO team, the moderator, fellow laureates, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Janice Asare, and I am the president of the Just Commit Foundation, presenting our program, Inspirational Business Stories. Our organization is officially incorporated as a non-profit in Ghana with a vision to leverage innovation to ensure youth and children development. According to UNESCO's report, over 617 million children and adolescents are not proficient in reading and maths, risk of losing livelihood. In Ghana, the literacy rate of females has been normally lower than male children and adolescents. Our Inspirational Business Stories program is in line with the following enabling factors that makes teaching and learning of children, youth, and adult literacy relevant and effective as recommended by UNESCO. These include motivating teachers, training them adequately and consistently, providing decent working conditions, satisfactory remuneration, career prospects, stable contracts and/or in the formal sector, provision of appropriate teaching environment, adequate materials, good working conditions, increasing status, and many more. During the program, we supervise teachers and students to read and answer questions from the storybook and run their businesses. Then we monitor and evaluate the test scores and profits for improvements. The program makes the world a better place since the Inspirational Business Storybook serves as guide for teachers to educate over 500 beneficiaries, including themselves and students, to gain skills in reading, creative writing, comprehension, and grammar, as well as science, technology, engineering, and maths, and business management. Over 70% of beneficiaries are girls from urban poor homes. Waste generated is used to create new, cheap, and reusable products for sale. Over 30 school and home businesses have been set up and running successfully. The program has won for partner schools 4 international business awards. It is also in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 1, zero poverty, Goal 4, quality education, Goal 8, decent work and economic empowerment. There are challenges our program faces because children, teachers, and volunteers are from different backgrounds. These threats and weaknesses, such as capital, resources, and arguments among them all are addressed by using clearly defined rules, responsibilities, and profit-sharing agreements. In the context of the current COVID-19 crisis and beyond, a new challenge presented, we are currently distributed our inspirational business stories books online and offline for safety, health, and eco-entrepreneurship training in English and local language to serve as manual to educate urban poor school administrators, staff, students, and guardians to mitigate the hazards of COVID-19 and other safety and health needs beyond COVID-19. The storybooks guide beneficiaries to make and sell safety and health resources such as hand sanitizers, soap, posters, etc., as well as raise enough capital to purchase other resources required to address safety and health needs beyond COVID-19 to save lives, time, and money. We also provide schools with free COVID-19 occupational safety and health policy guide developed using World Health Organization and UNICEF guidelines for implementation at schools. We incorporate WhatsApp and phone calls, and parents are more involved in literacy and entrepreneurship to set up more home businesses. We are making adjustments to our program to ensure continuity of meaningful learning, meaningful literacy, teaching and learning for youth and children. We are currently beta testing a reading companion app that helps beneficiaries learn to read on phone, offline, anywhere. We are working on Powered Inspira with solar power banks to offer an offline and online whole class on phone or tablet. With this, every lesson will be an inspirational story. Teachers will have access to professional training courses, teach offline or online, publish stories, books, and videos. This will motivate teachers, promote children literacy, youth and adult literacy of teachers and parents. This will narrow the digital divide, ensure guaranteed decent working conditions, better remunerations, and career prospects. Our team is very excited for this honor. Therefore, we say thank you, UNESCO. Thank you, the Embassy and Permanent Delegation of the People's Republic of China and Korea to UNESCO. Thank you, the jury. Thank you, the moderator. Thank you, for the fellow laureates. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for this fast-track speech, but clear and giving us the zest of your program. Thank you, sir, for your presence with us today. Let me move now to the next laureate. We have the pleasure to have with us Ms. Mirta Isabel Figuera Fernandez, Director, University Center for Social Participation, Meritorious Autonomous University of Puebla, Mexico. Señora Figuera Fernández, tiene la palabra.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todas y a todos.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. For me, it's a great honor to represent organizing this ceremony, the University Center for Social Participation. That belongs to the University of Puebla. It's a university in Mexico, and we are attempting to improve the living conditions of the social groups that are marginalized. But we also train students for social work for 19 years. We've been waging literacy campaigns in the state of Puebla in Mexico. In addition to literacy for young adults, there are also classes for primary school children, community work programs, community workshops in science, art, in reading. And we also manage community libraries. The literacy program is created each year during the students' vacations. And each year we have voluntary students who take part in the program. They go to rural communities in order to visit the houses of the adults who are being taught to read and write. And in the morning, They prepare the classes that they dispense in the afternoon, as well as the workshops that they dispense in the communities. There's a 4-month training process for them. Not only do we work on the technical and methodological aspects of literacy, but also we try to raise awareness as to the responsibility shouldered by a literacy trainer, which is very important. You know, there's 4 months the students can take part in critical thinking over the role they're going to carry out and their role in education. They learn what community work means and literacy in the broadest sense of the term, as well as technical aspects of reading and writing, facilitation, and choice of reading material. The training makes it possible to see how important it is for all to contribute, especially those of us who've enjoyed access to education, to transform the social situation and the situation of other people who haven't had that privilege. Once the literacy trainers begin working, they're accompanied throughout the literacy campaigns, and they draft specific teaching materials day by day for the people with whom they're going to work. And that advisory work means that their work corresponds to the needs of the adults with whom they work. This is always seen as cooperation and horizontal work between the trainers and the trainees. During the literacy campaign, the educators continue to be trained as educators. At the same time, they reflect on their role in the social and educational problems that they observe in their communities. It's very important for us to receive this acknowledgement of the work we've carried out over all these years, and which give us encouragement to keep working. We know that the economic crisis and the preparation for when it comes to school for many children is going to bring about great educational problems, and we have to tackle that problem in order to empower more parents and children and young people to really participate in education. The universities have generated certain actions to give economic support to the people affected by the current crisis and to carry out projects that would help us provide economic support. We're initiating a small literacy training project in which students will give literacy to their neighbors and give them training on how to improve their health conditions, because we've seen that solidarity has grown in the current crisis. And we hope that the commitment of students to the communities will mean that this literacy process will be a starting point for broader ranging projects. But for the learners and for the educators, we profoundly thank UNESCO and the government of the Republic of China for this important award, which means that we have to continue to keep abreast of new developments in education and literacy training. It won't be easy to overcome the current challenges, but we hope that this solidarity, and we will continue to show solidarity and commitment. We'd like to thank all of those, all the facilitators and all of those who've taken part in the project. And thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Director, and congratulations to the University of Puebla.
We are moving to the last laureate, and I have the pleasure to ask Mr. Abdurrahman Al-Aslami, Refugee Education Coordinator, General Literacy Office in Sana'a, Yemen, to take the floor and share the perspective of his organization. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy. First, Deep greeting from here, from Sana'a. It's my pleasure to meet you all in the platform Zoom, in the online webinar organized for UNESCO International Literacy Day. First of all, I'm so glad that our project was selected as one of the laureates for this year. It's pride of Yemen and for us. Our literacy office in Sana'a, Manat al-Asma, supervises on 215 literacy centers with 10,200 learners. We targeted 6 of these centers, which are taking care of educating refugees, where the number of learners for this year was 652. 79 of them are females. There are many factors that have made teaching and learning of youth and adult literacy relevant and effective. Facilitators are being trained on different teaching methods, which contributed a diversity of education for learners, especially in the light of Corona pandemic. The facilities that our project offered, the illiterate learners could complete their education in primary and secondary schools. Also, refugee students who lost their documents in their countries, a placement test is taken for them, and then given a governmental documents that qualify them to the appropriate education level. We faced a lot of challenges, such as the suspension of governmental salaries since 2015, as well as the linguistic challenge for refugees, and then finally the challenge of Corona pandemic. Under lack of resources as the internet, lack of open spaces to accommodate all students, poverty of many students, and lack of sources of income, where this greatly affected both teachers and learners, especially in the light of war and threaten, which threaten the education. And students drop out of schools, which had a negative impact on the educational process. So the education was stopped. Teachers were exploited in participation of health awareness about COVID-19 crisis, as well as participating on making masks. Then, after life returned to normal, the education process continued, ending the school year with final exams in open places and with protection procedures. In the context of Corona and beyond, we have a plan to distribute learners into groups in order to avoid overcrowding. And to achieve this, it's necessary to get more facilitators. And also finding alternative wide classes instead of narrow classes in coordination with the government to continue the literacy education. Finally, I extend my sincere thanks to the Director General of UNESCO, Ms. Audrey Ozely, as well as to all teams, the team of UNESCO, Mr. Borhan, Mr. Antoine, who is in contact with us, Ms. Stefania Ginani, Assistant Director General, UNESCO, and Ms. Rana Dijani, the Chair of the International Bureaus, and all international bureaus. I also extend my thanks to the Chinese and Korean ambassadors who participating us these great moments, and my deep great thanks to the Chinese government for such unlimited support for literacy program. I congratulate the other laureates of UNESCO Literacy Prize with my best regards to everyone. Thank you.
Shukran. Thank you very much for these nice words and for also thinking about the other laureates. Dear colleagues, let me congratulate again the 5 laureates. We are very pleased to see them around and to learn about their programs. Let me also thank the Korean Republic and thank the People's Republic of China for their continuous support to our work in literacy programs. Today has been a very important day for literacy. It shows that literacy matters. It shows that the literacy community is a vibrant community. But it shows also that we need to raise the voice to support literacy and to ensure that it is not neglected in the different initiatives, in the recovery plans, in the educational responses. Let us put our hands together to work together to continue supporting literacy and advancing literacy in the context of the Sustainable Development Agenda in SDG 4, and of course, in the short term, in the response to the COVID-19 crisis. I wish you all to stay safe, to be happy, and to continue supporting literacy. Thank you very much. And by now, the event is ending, and I wish you all the best. Bye.